The world is kind of divided into two: individuals who have control over their autonomic nervous system and those who don't. The people who do just have not just a competitive advantage, but a survival advantage.
Again, you talk about rhythm and rest and resilience, the idea of trust and fear. Can you just walk me through that?
When we are operating from a place of fear, we are operating from the sympathetic branch of our nervous system. That's when we're essentially accelerating the pace of our aging, and it sounds crazy, but that's the cost of living in fear. Having a more balanced autonomic nervous system, it doesn't require completely transforming your life. A lot of the most basic things are free and democratically available to all folks. And I think it's just figuring out how much control do I want to have with how I show up.
But no one is talking about what you're talking about. There's a whole other sector of data that it's essentially the autonomic nervous system that is not necessarily being incorporated. I think that we're missing some of this.
And there is no question that late night eating bubbles up almost on par with alcohol in terms of having a deleterious effect on resting physiology. Content quality very much matters. What's really interesting is a paper just came out looking at duration and all-cause mortality, and indeed the long sleepers have far worse outcomes than the short sleepers.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think
Dr. Kristen Holmes, I would consider you a secret weapon to many. Beyond global head of human performance and principal scientist at Whoop, you are an extraordinary human. Not only, so I want to get you very embarrassed before we start, not only have I watched you work so hard for the things that you believed in supporting other humans, but your humility in doing this and the hard work and the sacrifice, I don't think people will ever see. But what they will see is what you actually produce. And your new book, Aligned, is beautifully done. And it is not just data-driven, which everybody who listens to this podcast and everyone that knows you, they know you for the data. But there is an absolute other dimension to you, and that's very soulful, which I think we just all need more of.
Yeah, I definitely wanted to write a book that wasn't about performance optimization, but was actually about wholeness. And that's what I hope the book in the end achieves. But you made me emotional, so thanks.
You and I have actually been friends for a long time.
I know. Folds of Honor, I think, was where we met, right? When we were helping the guys with their 777. Which was super fun. And I remember I got home and I was talking to my daughter. I'm like, I just met my soul sister. Mm-hmm. I could not believe how gracious and generous and, you reached out to me. I probably had 2,500 followers on Instagram, and you reached out and you said, I believe in what you're doing. How can I help you? Like, who does that? Every woman I come across, you have impacted them, like who's in this field as a scientist trying to kind of break through and get their work out there. And, you support all of us in ways that it's mind blowing how you have the time, frankly, but I'm so grateful.
Well, you are just, like I said, extraordinary. You and I were just chatting a second ago about trauma, and you also mentioned something I'd never heard before, but I suppose I've thought about, and that's this idea that there are two kind of entities or two groups of people. And again, this is kind of simplifying it, but you were saying those that manage their autonomic nervous system and those that don't.
Yeah. Yeah. The world is kind of divided into two, individuals who have control over their autonomic nervous system and those who don't. And the people who do just have not just a competitive advantage, but a survival advantage. And, I think what is really interesting in just some of the literature that's emerging, especially around aging and longevity, is that a lot of the hallmarks of aging are actually symptoms of a deregulated autonomic nervous system. So when we think about cellular senescence and mitochondrial dysfunction, genomic instability, inflammation, you can just kind of go down the line, proteostasis. Those are symptoms of a deregulated autonomic nervous system. And there's this beautiful paper that was literally just published in December of 2025 by Arico and colleagues, and I hope I pronounced that right. And basically that's exactly what they show is that sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system deregulation and its role in aging. And they posit exactly what I just said, that all of these hallmarks of aging are a symptom of this dysregulation. So, my book, Aligned, is very much about kind of putting the autonomic nervous system at the center, and the idea of, building behaviors, routines, strategies, kind of a way of being in the world that allows you to build a robust nervous system in ways that allow you to respond and adapt to your environment in ways that can make you feel proud. And I think you mentioned trauma, and that's, there's been some really, when you back up and you think about, all right, well, we've got this paper by Arico, there's lots and lots of other evidence, that an autonomic nervous system matters. There's some work done by Dr. Eugene Lipov, and he's kind of a bit of a maverick in the field. He came up with basically a procedure that blocks your nerve. It's called the stellate ganglion block, and you've probably heard of it. And basically what it does, you've got your autonomic nervous system has two branches, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic. The parasympathetic is kind of like the brake, the rest and digest. The sympathetic is the activation, right? Like that's when you're hard charging and you're going. Folks who have trauma are stuck in this sympathetic overactivation, which again is, a hallmark of aging and disease, right? So we want to move fluidly between. But what happens with trauma is you end up stuck. You end up in this overactivated sympathetic state. And what the ganglion block does is basically relieve that brake and allow the parasympathetic branch to dominate. And what he's seen, he did a study with 170 special operators who are treatment resistant, had post-traumatic stress disorder. And basically what he saw when he administered this block was immediate relief that was sustained for, weeks after that treatment. So that's just another example of when we can gain control and create more of a balanced autonomic nervous system, we allow ourselves almost to just breathe, like literally and figuratively,
And you do talk about circadian rhythm and sleep, and there's a whole host of ways and behaviors, which is interesting because the autonomic nervous system, I wonder, are there individuals that are more defended against?
Like protected?
Yeah, as opposed to, so are there individuals that are just born more robust?
So heart rate variability, which is a measure of your autonomic nervous system, and I think that's the other paper that's worth highlighting by Kim and his colleagues, published in 2018. It's kind of like the meta-analysis and review of the literature that looks at stress and HRV. And what they found is that HRV is indeed a very good proxy for autonomic nervous system functioning. So when we take this measure of HRV, and we try to understand, well, what does HRV actually mean, right? If it's this proxy for your autonomic nervous system health, well, if I have an HRV today, what does that actually mean? Well, we know somewhere around 47 to 65% is heritable, is genetic.
That's a lot.
There's a range, right? There's quite a big range. In I think to your question, some people fall on the lower end. So maybe if you're 47%, you've inherited HRV, it's 47%, you will be potentially more
susceptible,
or accepting of these behaviors that help build that robustness. So I think there is this range, but I think what's really empowering about this literature is that there are a lot of interventions that you can deploy. There's ways of being in the world that will help bolster your resilience, right? Your autonomic nervous system resilience. And I think that's really what I was trying to write about and align, is that, you know, there's these physiological dimensions and there's these psychological dimensions, right? And if you can understand what the big levers are, you can then create or design a life that allows you this level of resilience, right? That allows you to step out into the world with firmer persuasion, right? Like mentally, physically, emotionally, and I would argue spiritually.
Take me through, which you know that this is the next obvious question, what that looks like.
Yeah.
And what that looks like for both parties, meaning you do deal with elite performers, the most elite of the elite. And then I would say that there's, you know, other people that we're not getting on a racetrack or we're not going to the Olympics.
Right.
But we still want to be able to manage our world.
Yeah. I think at the bottom line, I think for whether, you know, you're the most elite performer in the world, or, you know, competing in the Tour de France, or, you know, driving an F1 car for Ferrari, the same principles that apply to those individuals apply to the regular Janes and Joes of the world, in terms of how do you reduce the risk of illness and injury, right? And because it all comes down to that, right? If we're sick and we're injured, we give up time, you know, time with the people that we love. We you know, halt momentum, you know, as we work toward the things that we care about. So I think when we look at the dimensions that reduce illness and injury burden at a very basic level, it's all the same stuff, right? And I think to your point, it's like, well, how hardcore do we actually want to be? And I think that's what's kind of exciting, is that having a more balanced autonomic nervous system is not, you know, it doesn't require completely transforming your life. A lot of the most basic things are free and democratically available to all folks, right? And I think it's just figuring out, all right, how much control do I want to have with how I show up in the world? And I think that hopefully is a motivating force. You know, if you want to, you know, be available for the people and things that you love, if you want to have presence and be able to engage in the world and your work consistently in a way that feels good, you know, a lot of these things that I outline are kind of core to that.
Thank you to one of the sponsors of the show, and that is Egg Life. Now, I have been eating Egg Life out of my purse since my first book launch. I was traveling, I had 10 minutes to run into a grocery store and pick up something that was high protein. And there it was, a wrap made from egg whites, not flour. It was almost as if the gates of heaven opened and an angel of protein handed me this incredible Egg Life. Yes, and in fact, maybe that's where they came up with the name. High in protein, they have 11 grams of high quality protein and less than 3 grams of carbs. It is a low in carbs and clean ingredients. These Egg Life wraps, their texture it's fluffy, it tastes amazing. I am telling you, if you are going to try one new product, this is it. It is so versatile. Egg Life egg white wraps, they make it easy to sneak high quality protein into your favorite meals and snacks. You can find Egg Life in the refrigerated section at Aldi, Whole Foods, Kroger, Target, Walmart, and more. Visit egglifefoods.com to find a retailer near you. This book is beautifully done. The first part, again, you talk about rhythm and rest and resilience. The idea of trust and fear. Can you just walk me through that?
Yeah. So, you know, when you think about emotions, they're kind of bucketed into two. You've got emotions of trust and you've got emotions of fear. And one of the things I work through in the book with the reader, the listener, is that emotions of fear are not bad. You know, we all have them, you know, whether it's insecurity or jealousy or shame, guilt, right? Like these pass through us all the time, right? But I think what I am trying to help folks recognize is that we don't need to be stuck in those emotions. And, simple techniques like affect labeling, where we can label our emotion and just get curious about it. And it sounds really cheesy, but honestly, like that is one of the best ways to understand yourself, become more aware of what is keeping you stuck. People might not even recognize that certain emotions or fear are actually holding them back from being able to pursue the life that they want to pursue. So once you start to become aware of these emotions of trust versus fear and what is actually taking hold of you in the moment, you can then start to reframe how you're approaching that moment, right? And you can even have like a little bit of a sense of humor about it. But I think when we are operating from a place of fear, we are operating from the sympathetic branch of our nervous system, right? That's when that's when we're essentially accelerating the pace of our aging, and it sounds crazy, but that's the cost of living in fear. And so I really challenge the reader to take stock of these emotions and evaluate them in real time and try to replace emotions of fear with emotions of trust as much as you can.
What would be an example of an emotion of trust?
Yeah. So trust is, joy and harmony and, kindness and kindred spirit. And, I think, for moments when, for example, peacefulness, when you are in a situation where you're feeling maybe insecure, or maybe you don't belong, those can be really debilitating emotions. And when you shift them to more of a kind of a loving kindness framework, especially towards yourself, so more self-compassion, you can shift that viewpoint. And there's lots of like little techniques that you can do. Loving kindness meditation, I think, is one of the protocols or techniques that I offer. In the third part of the book, I have 22 kind of science-backed.
I don't know how you decided on
techniques.
What made it, and what is on the chopping floor. So it's
literally from the literature, the most efficacious in improving kind of your autonomic nervous system resilience, right? And I think what the important thing to note with trust and fear is that when you have a healthy, balanced autonomic nervous system, you have the ability to access feelings of trust easier, right? When you are...
What do you mean by that? So if you balance your sympathetic and parasympathetic, and I'm assuming that the way in which we understand that is through our heart rate variability, would that be the primary?
That's a measure,
primary measure.
You can feel it, I would argue, but when you start to really sense the body, but yeah.
And if we have this marker where we know it's out of balance, we then move to these emotions, or it's these emotions that then move the needle for our autonomic nervous system.
Yeah, I think just recognizing that if you are constantly operating from a place of fear, you are in a sympathetic state. And that comes at a cost, right? That's going to deplete your energy. That's going to impair your mitochondrial function. That is going to, degenerate it will impair your sleep. There's no question. Your sleep onset latency, your time in REM, your gut biome, right? I think awareness around these emotions become a very, very powerful lever. Because once you become aware, then you can take action to build toward a life of trust. And a lot of bad things happen to people, right? Like, situations are not ideal. But I think if you accept that bad things happen, but you ultimately have control and agency over how you love yourself, then a lot of that power that you've given over to others starts to fall away. And again, all of this will come back to the nervous system, which, there's just a lot of evidence, out there in the literature, a lot of really good research that's been done by folks. I mean, we see it in our data too. We published a paper in Emotion, a year ago, May, where we looked at emotions of threat and emotions of challenge. So threat and challenge appraisals, essentially. When you view your day as threatening versus challenging, what is actually happening to the cardiac profile? Mm-hmm. And interestingly, when you perceive your day as threatening and challenging, the day from a cardiac autonomic perspective actually doesn't look that different. But where it manifests is in your resting physiology during sleep. You don't drop into those deeper, more restorative stages of sleep. Your heart rate variability stays suppressed. Your resting heart rate stays elevated when you're in a threat, when you've appraised your day as threatening. So fear is threatening, right? So I think the takeaway from that paper is understanding that how you think about your life during the day manifests in your sleep and impairs your ability to restore and recover overnight, which is really the time I would argue that there's lots of moments during the day that we need to be building in parasympathetic nervous system, modalities, but certainly sleep is the moment. And if we are not reframing our day as challenging, that is, we are not getting ourselves into those feelings where you can access trust, you end up basically carrying that into your sleep, right? And you're just giving up a lot of opportunity to recover.
When you watch children, they go through this head stability, then they crawl, and then they sit. And these are inherent understandings. You don't have to teach the child how to manage their neck or how to sit and then walk. Evolutionarily, when I think about this autonomic nervous system, are there things that we should inherently have been able to manage? And does that
I know where you're going.
Land in that way.
This is a big premise of the book. Modern society has not set us up for success. I don't know if that's what you're getting at, but a lot of the, if you look at the technological advancements over the course of the last, 600 years or whatever, and then you look at how our biology has changed. The biology line's flat, to be super clear.
Isn't that weird though? Don't you think we should have an adaptation response? And
we haven't adapted to blue light at night, for example. We haven't adapted. These are things. And all of these lack of adaptation to modern life comes at a cost, right? That's why folks are sick, right? Mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually. That's why we're in the place that we're at.
Can autonomic nervous system regulation be self-taught without the verbiage? Meaning, crawl, walk, run are all innate human capacity, abilities. Yeah. Do you think that, and I don't know this answer, do you think that there's a toggle between fear and joy that is, say, thousands of years ago? Was there a natural way that we were able to do that?
To create balance in the nervous system.
The nervous system balance.
It's hard to say. Obviously, but I would say that probably a lot of the same things that create nervous system stability today are the same things that created nervous system stability on the savannah. Having access to food, right? Having a connection and community and feeling supported, so important. Having probably a sense of agency and self-efficacy. You have the skills and resources to contribute to your tribe, in ways that are helpful and valuable, and having purpose and meaning. I think that those are human needs, right? Those are core psychological needs that we have as humans that I think probably date as far back as, the cave people. So I think a lot of those same dimensions of human flourishing have held true. And I think what I argue in the book is that, modern society has kind of pulled us from those primal thresholds of nature, right? Which have a real cost to both our psychology and our physiology. So when you think about the lack of access to light, right? Natural light's really, really important, but we spend 93% of our time indoors. That comes at a cost, right? We have access to food, but our brain is wired, is still wired for the savannah, right? So we have to enact huge amounts of discipline and willpower to fight the fridge, right? We've got, and we don't have to work to get our food anymore, right? So it's there in a package. It's there in the fridge for us, right? So, that comes at a cost, right? The easy access to food, and eating, not just over the course of 12 hours, but for many Americans, 16, 17 hours, right? Which comes at a cost, right? When we think about our metabolic health, and our sleep and, other things that it impacts. We have access to, alcohol and so I think all of these, we have the ability to be super active during the inactive phase of our circadian rhythm, after the sun goes down. And
that's me pretty much.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's all, it's a lot of us, right? And I think, I don't know that modern life is going to change, but I think we have to understand its impact on our health and do our best to, mitigate some of those negative effects with other behaviors that can kind of, put us into balance.
As a physician, I spend a lot of time talking to patients about healthy aging. And one of the most important factors is maintaining skeletal muscle. I know it sounds simple, but simple isn't the same as easy. And many people struggle to consistently consume enough high-quality protein to support muscle health, recovery, and long-term metabolic function. And thank you to one of the sponsors of the show, Perfect Amino. That's one reason why I personally use and recommend Perfect Amino by Body Health. Perfect Amino provides all of the essential amino acids your body needs for protein synthesis and beyond. It is a highly bioavailable form of amino acids. It's easy to take and can be a practical option for individuals looking to support muscle health, especially when meeting protein goals are difficult. Remember, muscle is the organ of longevity, whether you're training hard in the gym or simply focused on staying strong and independent as you age. Giving your body the building blocks it needs is an absolute non-negotiable for your long-term health. Go to bodyhealth.com and use the code LION20 for 20% off your first order. That's bodyhealth.com, code LION20. You were driving back up to, I don't know if you remember this, but you actually were driving back up to Phoenix. I was like, why are you not kind of staying down there? And you're like, because I have to get up at a certain time. And actually you had arranged your travel so that you weren't going to be like sleep deprived in the way that, the rest of us weren't thinking about it, but it was just so simple. Do you think there's the thinking aspect and then there's the behavior aspect? And you talk a lot about aligning the food and the sleep-wake time. Yeah. Which do you think pushes one more?
I'll answer that, but I think you need to the thinking, the behaving. Like I think you need to back out and figure out. All right, if I know all of these things to be true and they're important, like maintaining my circadian rhythm while traveling, so I can get up the next morning and take my son to ice hockey, which I think is what was happening. I just wanted to be safe, not sleep deprived, and present for him. But that gets to my point is that's my why. My why is to say, I my whole entire life, my mom was really sick, and I want my kids to see a mother who is thriving, who is healthy. And I just frankly don't want them to have to worry about me in the way that I worried every single day about my own mom. And, that's my why. That's why I work out. That's why I drive to Phoenix to maintain my circadian rhythm. That's why I prioritize my sleep in the way that I do. That's why I think about circadian alignment, which is a driver of autonomic nervous system resilience. It's why I think about these things, and that's why I carve out time to be in nature every day so I can show up for them, really. And that's my why. And that's what motivates me to kind of what feels like or sounds like a sacrifice. It just isn't a sacrifice to me anymore, because I would never trade how I am with them, being able to be patient and tolerant and kind and available to engage with them in a way that, makes me feel proud. In terms of like the levers that move the most, I mean, I would say contrast is really important. One of the concepts that I think folks need to understand is this concept of circadian amplitude. And the way, and I want a shirt that says "Got Amplitude," in the same way as "Got Milk."
Yeah,
we need merch.
I mean,
we need
come
some
on,
merch,
guys,
Gabrielle.
get on that. Yep,
got Amplitude. So you want a robust circadian amplitude, and the way to do that is to create a lot of contrast that is aligned with a natural light-dark cycle. So we have these patterns that are happening over the course of a 24-hour day, right? And you've had some amazing circadian scientists on this podcast as well.
Sachin,
Alexis.
Yes.
She's phenomenal. And Sachin, yeah. So I would encourage you to watch and or listen to those. Yeah, because they're so good. They're so good. But if people want to understand more about circadian rhythms, but this is an area that, my PhD thesis was basically looking at circadian alignment and its relationship to both physiological and psychological resilience in humans. And indeed, circadian alignment predicts both physiological and psychological resilience.
And that simply means that you are waking up at the time that the sun is coming up. You are going.
So sleep consistency was really kind of the basis of, it is a proxy for circadian alignment. So absolutely. So sleep-wake consistency is a huge driver of amplitude, right? But in order to kind of have amplitude, we want to have a lot of contrast. So back to the big lever is you want dark nights and bright days, and you want to create as much of that amplitude as possible.
I see, okay? Visually or within the environment.
Yeah. So in when you have that contrast, you sleep better, you recover faster, your metabolism works more efficiently. When you are super active during the day and not active at night, again, contrast. You eat when when you're most active, so you're fueling for your activity requirements, which I talk about in the book too. I'm very passionate about that, which is happening during the day, and you're not eating at night. So basically, you're creating this contrast, helps facilitate this amplitude that we know is correlated with health and longevity. And I have a paper in review right now that basically looks at this very thing. It's 5,000 women and a few different cohorts, but 5,000 women who are in perimenopause and menopause. I think 3,600 women who have a natural menstrual cycle. And basically the thing that predicts symptom severity and frequency is amplitude, is heart rate amplitude. And you can imagine all of the physiological variables have an amplitude, are following this 24-hour pattern. The more amplitude, the less pain is the bottom line.
For every domain?
For all, so just heart rate, this paper's just heart rate, but we're looking at all these other physiological variables play ball in the same way. But I just wanted to get this paper out there, kind of put a stake in the ground, because I thought it was interesting. The effects are small, but you can imagine if you were to look at someone who has cancer, for example, their amplitude, they'd have no amplitude. You look at someone old and unfit, okay, or even young and unfit, low amplitude. Amplitude is an incredible proxy or kind of marker of health. We want to try to preserve our amplitude, and we do that through these circadian levers. And you improve the circadian levers, you improve your autonomic nervous system resilience.
How long does that take?
Not long. So, there's been some studies, like just a couple weeks camping, no artificial light, you can cure a lot of ills. So it doesn't take that long.
In heart rate variability, it's the space between beats, right? That would determine if you could lay out the heart rate variability, exactly what it is, where amplitude fits in, so that we can understand exactly what lever, in terms of what order we need to pull.
So we want lots of amplitude. So when we think about heart rate variability, just to define that for folks, it's quite literally the time interval between heartbeats. And that is, your heart is not a metronome, like it's very highly variable between heartbeats. And the more variable, the more robust and healthy your autonomic nervous system is. So we want a lot of variability, higher HRV between heartbeats.
And would that equal higher amplitude?
And that correlates with higher amplitude.
I see.
Yeah. So more contrast between the day and the night. So when you're sleeping, you want lots of parasympathetic saturation. You want lots of, amplitude for parasympathetic saturation. And so during the day, you would expect to have, because you're engaged in life and you're moving around, you're going to be more sympathetically driven, right? But that's normal. And that contrast is really what the body craves and needs, right? To be healthy and thriving. That said, modern life is such where, we're not sitting under the tree after we hunt for an hour and a half. We're like basically on to the next thing, right? So we need to build in moments during the day to basically ensure that we're giving ourselves an opportunity to rest and restore, right? So we can re-engage our task with, the same level of kind of focus and quality as we did previously. We don't want to degrade across the day. And one of the ways to do that is to kind of build in these little mini moments of rest throughout the day. But in terms of relationship between Amplitude and HRV, their HRV has a circadian rhythm, right? So it's a little confounded, right?
Are you like me, watching your skin age? It kind of sucks. But as science continues to evolve, we have options. We've heard a lot about peptides lately, and speaking of peptides, thank you to OneSkin for sponsoring the show. Now, I have used these products long before they became a sponsor. There is normal skin aging, and then there is skin health. That's why I use OneSkin. It's founded by female PhD scientists, and it's rooted in rigorous research. I use OS1 Face Topical Supplement, and it's completely changed how my skin texture looks and feels. Even my husband Shane is happy because it replaces my old messy skin routine with one simple step. At its core is the OS01 peptide, and it's clinically proven to target a leading driver of aging skin, so you can have healthier skin over time. It's born from over a decade of longevity research, and this targets the visible signs of aging, helping you get better skin. And for a limited time only, try OneSkin for 15% off using the code Dr. Lyon. That's oneskin.co. Use the code Dr. Lyon for 15% off. So when they're listening to this and they go, okay, I am a woman, I am in perimenopause, menopause. What do I need to do that's going to improve my amplitude? The biggest levers that I can pull.
I would say wake up at the same time every day. If you had short, disrupted sleep, if at all possible, you want to try to build in a nap. And I know that's not possible for everyone, and some people listen to it, they'll laugh, but if you can, even 30 minutes before, 12 o'clock, even just shutting your eyes.
The time?
You just don't want to interfere with biological sleep, right? There's nothing more frustrating than not being able to sleep when you want to sleep. So in a lot of setting yourself up for a restorative, beautiful night's sleep actually starts during the day. And I think that's what folks get wrong, I would say, as someone who studies sleep and is inside this world a ton. I would say people think about sleep in the lead up to sleep, but not actually how their behaving during the day actually impacts sleep. We
Even
know
though it says, but I'm a night person.
Yeah, we can talk about that in a second. But I would say, again, in order to mitigate some of the symptoms that occur in perimenopause, menopause, and this isn't the holy grail by any means. I understand how complex this phase of life is for so many women, and debilitating for so many women. So I don't want to I'm not dismissing that, but I do believe that circadian alignment is a really important path, creating as much contrast, waking up at the similar time every day, getting as much natural light as humanly possible. And you got to move.
All day long or just in the morning?
As much as possible. Like, I am getting as much light as I possibly can throughout the day.
Contacts, no contacts, glasses, doesn't matter?
Sunglasses matter. You want to be able to take in all of the entire spectrum that exists in the sky of light is good for our bodies. Obviously, if you're out for extended periods of time, protect your skin, and maybe at that point, if you're on the water, wear sunglasses. If you're out on the water for a long time,
But we're deconditioned to be outside.
For sure.
essentially what you're saying.
It's like the same, it's like working out. Like no one is really overtraining, right? For the most part.
No, that's why I was listening to you say, okay, we have to build in rest. And I'm thinking that's from the sympathetic response, like the nervous system response, but we probably have to encourage people to push. And as you're talking, I realize that I'm probably not even moving enough, creating enough contrast.
Yeah, I know. And most folks aren't, and we kind of wonder why, why do I get sick or why am I getting injured? A lot of it is this lack of contrast. And we want to make that as stark as we can. And that's, I think that's just a great, just a very simple way of thinking about your day. You've got the active phase of your circadian rhythm and the inactive phase of your circadian rhythm. During your active phase, you're eating, you're socializing, you're freaking working out, you're walking, you're doing little exercise snacks, you're engaged in life.
How many hours? So for example, as you are building out an ideal day, in an ideal day for a woman or a guy to create as much contrast as possible, you're outside as much as you can.
Yeah. I will always prioritize working outside if I can. So today's a good example. I lifted in the gym, probably spent 45 minutes and then went out on a little terrace and jump roped, and did some abs, some weighted abs and some jump roping and was out there as much as possible. Last night I got in, went for a walk, as the sun was setting and, I really make every effort I can. Before I left. So if I know I'm traveling and I won't have access to light, I will make up for it. Before I traveled, I went on a long run outside. I went for a walk. I worked outside in the morning. I brought my laptop out there outside. Even, at Whoop, we have outdoor areas. I work outside as much as possible. I'm really, really conscious of being outdoors.
Is there a light debt?
I have absolutely no idea how to quantify that, but I mean, I think the minimum effective dose is something like 90 minutes, in order to really, keep your mental, physical, and emotional well-being online. I think that's what the literature says, somewhere around 90 minutes. But the fact is, zero Americans are probably getting that.
I mean, totally. I was just thinking about Shane, who's if he's operating or working 100 hours, and he maybe is outside a total of 40 minutes a day when he runs to work and back.
I know.
If that.
I know. It's crazy. And frontline healthcare workers, I mean, when you are not working those hours, I think in terms of the same way you have to bank some sleep, you got to be outside. You need to be just make up for, I think you can make up for it. But that has to be the priority.
So you're outside as much as possible. Yep. What about this movement?
Yeah. I mean, I have a treadmill at my desk. I have, kettlebells, resistant bands. I write in my book, it's one of the domains of intelligent training is exercise snacks. I put it in there, because I really believe in it. I've been experimenting. I'm probably on a good 4 years of exercise snacks, but I stopped thinking about my workout as the end all be all. So,
this is a really good point.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of us were 45 minutes an hour in the gym and we're sitting literally all day. And a lot of us are knowledge workers, right? I'm writing manuscripts and reviewers' comments, I'm working with teams and athletes and, I'm on Zoom a lot. But I stand generally. And I have a little bouncy ball. And I'll literally just rip out 100 kettlebell swings over the course of a day, just to kind of break up, even if I've worked out in the morning. So I just think we're not meant to be sitting, and I think that's really clear. And there's lots of folks that talk about that, which I love. But it's worth, I think, saying again that we need to make movement an all day kind of thing. That's what, I mean, when you think about, folks who, and I don't want to suggest that, everything that was on the Savannah was great. That's, there's a lot of wonderful things that we are afforded by modern science and technology. But I think one of the real downsides is that when we drive everywhere, we just don't have to walk and move in ways that we used to. I mean, we used to, on average, walk about 10 miles a day. I think women were 7, men were 10. So that's a lot of movement. So I think figuring out how do I build in movement. And we know people who move more in our data set, which is absolutely massive. We're talking hundreds and thousands of people. When we look at what are the features, what are the behaviors that people engage in that have the best sleep? I mean, the people who move more sleep better. There's no question. The people who are fitter sleep better and actually sleep less.
How many hours if someone is fitter, are they sleepy? Is it
about 7 hours and 20 minutes is kind of the average for the really fit person. And then if you're unfit, you're sleeping over 8 hours, 8.5. And what's really interesting is a paper just came out looking at duration and all-cause mortality. And indeed, the long sleepers have far, far worse outcomes than the short sleepers.
Why do you think that is?
Well, I think inflammation probably, I think if you are dealing depression, if you're dealing with mental or physical issues, you're going to your body just feels like it needs to spend more time in bed to try to heal and right itself. So yeah, I mean, that's another reason why to think about your movement, because it's very highly correlated with what's happening at night. And the depth of sleep as well.
And the intensity of training, because you do train pretty intensely.
Hard. Yeah.
And I've seen you carry logs and you're going in that. I mean, I don't even want to come hang out with you because I'm going to have to be running down the trails, and then I have to jump into this lake. No, I'll come anytime. There's like ice frozen.
I know.
Protein is having a major moment right now. It seems like it's being slapped on everything. From water bottles to cereal, I don't know, to Kleenex boxes. But with all the hype, it can be tough to figure out if you're getting enough of the right kind of protein. Because hey, it's not just about the quantity of protein you eat, it's also about the quality. And that's exactly why this episode is brought to you by David Protein Bar. Each Gold David bar packs an incredible 28 grams of protein for only 150 calories and 0 sugar. That equates to about 75% of calories from protein, which, by the way, completely blows away most protein bars that hover roughly around 40%. And it's hands down one of the easiest ways to hit your daily macro goals. And best of all, they taste incredible. My dad loves them, and he has 0 filter when it comes to food, including my cooking. So if you want to upgrade your protein routine today, go to davidprotein.com/Dr. Lyon and subscribe to save 10% on every order. To create as much contrast, what I'm hearing in my mind is that you have to work really hard. It's not just the overall movement, but there's probably a level of intensity which is different than, say, if we look at the data, right? So training in geriatrics, the data would suggest that it doesn't matter if someone is lifting heavy weights or higher volume, just as long as they're getting the stimulus.
Yeah.
But I didn't take into account any of the contrast data or any of the amplitude data.
Yeah.
I am thinking about it in a very unidimensional way. Is this improving strength and or hypertrophy? But maybe the better question is it improving strength and hypertrophy? And what is it doing to amplitude and contrast? Yeah.
I mean, I think that's a really good framework, that isn't probably taken into consideration as much, I think as it relates to training, there is a sweet spot. And like I said, or I think we both agree that most Americans need to move more, right? So that's just the bottom line. But there is a subset of folks who are overtraining, for sure. And you see that manifest very clearly in heart rate variability. What's interesting is, I have access to the literally the most elite athletes in the world who are programming, down to the millisecond, right, across their day. They have to. But what they don't do is overtrain. Like they have because they can't. Like but I think the weekend warrior or like the recreational athlete, I think the default is like more is better, right? And that's where I think the data become really powerful, especially around HRV. You will see in your HRV if you are overtraining, if you're not getting this balance. And so I think as it relates to intensity matters, but it's not intensity every day necessarily. We want to have, it's a few days a week, right? And then, I include this in the book because this is also very clear in the data. Zone 1 and zone 2 are really powerful drivers of recovery. And I don't even label them as exercise because they are literally, they activate the parasympathetic branch of the nervous system. They improve vagal tone immensely. So I think that when we think about our week and how we program our movement, it's this combination of, the long, slow walk or the long jog or, again, ideally outside in nature. And then you're sprinkling in some really high intensity work, right? That might mimic, when you're chasing after, running from the lion or chasing after the deer or whatever it might be. It's just like thinking about like, what were those movements that we used to do, right? That are protective, right? And trying to kind of program for that is the way I think about it.
And the other thing that potentially maybe we've gotten wrong, not you, but I think in the literature, this idea of, I've been very critical of cycle syncing, and I don't know if it's critical is the right word, but I think that it's almost before its time with our level of understanding. When it comes to, do you need to train a certain way because you're in the follicular phase versus another phase? Where does all of that fit in?
Yeah, I have access to a lot of these data, so I come at it from like an actual point of view from the data. And there are definitely, for women who are naturally cycling, there are differences between menses, follicular phase, and the luteal phase, in that there is more, there are declines, in resting physiology during the luteal phase, right? There's folks get less sleep in the lead up to menses on average. But I think in terms of, and I like this pushback that, it doesn't mean that you can't PR during your luteal phase. It doesn't mean that you can't have your best performance, right, during that time frame. But I do think
there are differences.
There are differences, and I think that, and it's more of just like when you know that, then you can prepare for it, right? You can be a little bit more strategic. But I would say that you go on how you feel. The other thing that we see in the data is women are highly, highly variable, in terms of length of cycle. And, there's just a lot of variability. One of the things that is very protective is a lower CV. So lower heart rate variability coefficient of variation. So
what's that?
So it's just basically the day-to-day variation in HRV. So when you have lots of changes day-to-day in HRV, that actually isn't good. So you want a lower CV, which I know is opposite to when we're looking at HRV, in an average HRV, like you want it kind of high. But when you're looking at the CV, you want to actually limit day-to-day variability. And this is consistent with across all the variables. So respiratory rate, resting heart rate, like we want low CV across all of these. And if you look at the very top...
Which makes sense.
Which totally makes sense, right? You look at the top cyclists in the world who we work with on the Tour de France, they have very low CV. They're like 6%. So if you look at a frontline healthcare clinician, they're 30%.
Meaning their heart rate variability from day
their
to
CV,
day.
Their day to day, it's so expressed as a percentage, essentially. And I would say the average person on our platform is probably in the 20s, right? And that's just not being aware that this is a thing, right?
Totally.
So we don't have a lot of stability in our physiology because one night we're up until 2 a.m. trying to finish a paper, or the next night we're going out with our buddies, drinking alcohol and having late meals and getting short sleep. And, the next night we sleep for 13 hours. This creates enormous amount of instability in our physiology. And the fact is women are way more susceptible to that than men because it's just the way it is, regardless of whether or not I want to have a baby, my body is set up for that to create safety. And a lot of this variable behavior creates variability in the physiology, which is not protective.
I actually really like what you said, because you see probably both sides of the arguments all the time, right? So you've got
I do.
one group, and it's
Yeah.
and it's interesting because what I would say that we measure from a muscle health perspective potentially doesn't or isn't that sensitive to these changes in the follicular phase or the ovulatory phase or perimenopause or the estrogen, progesterone.
They're kind of single time points. We're talking massive longitudinal data sets.
This is, I like being wrong. You know, I like learning.
Yeah.
And I can tell you that, say from a strength perspective or a training perspective, and again, you see this all the time. You've got one group that says, it doesn't matter if you're male or female or where you are in your cycle, good training is good training. And I think that we could agree on that.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But I'm also, as someone who studies and sees these time points over large data sets, which I don't really think anyone has access to. It just doesn't exist in the way that you have access to it. I'm also hearing you say that there's something else going on. That maybe the outcomes that we're looking at from a training perspective are not sensitive enough.
Yeah. To pick up on some of these
whatever
nuances.
The changes, you know, for example, we have a mutual friend who I think is actually very ahead of her time, and she gets criticized a lot. And I don't know if it's warranted criticism. It potentially, again, from a performance standpoint, maybe the science just hasn't caught up with the things that you are talking about now. Because it seems like there's the performance aspect and then there's the medicine aspect. And the performance aspect seems exponentially more advanced than how this relates in a outcome for a healthcare provider.
For sure. And obviously I can't speak to the clinical side, but I can speak to the performance side. And there are sensitivities, right? And the more variable the physiology, the more unpredictable your menstrual cycle is going to be, right? So there's an impact, you know? And so that does maybe change. If you have performance goals, that might change how you train slightly, right? Which I know, you know, is opposite of the narrative right now.
But no one is talking about what you're talking about. And there's a whole other sector of data that it's essentially the autonomic nervous system data set that is not necessarily being incorporated in. I think that that's smart. I think that we're missing some of this.
I think so, yeah. And, you know, I think what is maybe hard for folks to hear because it's hard to adopt is consistency in certain behaviors, sleep-wake time, meal timing. And there's a whole kind of subset of folks who believe that meal timing isn't, you know, that doesn't matter as much. And I think calorie for calorie, it might not, but I think there is enough data, I think, to support that we are more metabolically primed earlier in the day.
Yeah.
You know, we should be, generally speaking, I mean, you're a nutrition scientist, so I would be curious your thoughts, but I think we should be generally eating the bulk of our calories, you know, between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m., generally speaking.
Yeah, I think that's good advice.
If you have performance goals, if you are not getting the macronutrients you need distributed across the day and you are hungry at 10 o'clock at night, have yogurt. Mike Ormsby's lab has shown that that's fine. Awesome. But generally speaking, I think if we can give ourselves at least 12 hours where we're not eating, that has massive health benefits. And again, I'm talking about a massive data set that, again, not many people have access to. And there is no question that late night eating bubbles up almost on par with alcohol, almost on par as sleep-wake inconsistency, almost on par as with fever in terms of having a deleterious effect on resting physiology. So again, content quality very much matters, but I think timing matters too.
And do you think it's fair to say that that you guys are ahead of the curve? I mean, I think a lot of this is ahead of the curve, and just like with science, when the two meet, right? You've got groups of scientists, but this is, again, cycle syncing is not even the right word for it. But timing your training, what I'm hearing you say is that, yes, if you care, I am not someone, it's interesting. I think that we're very desensitized to how we feel. And if someone were, I think that there are two groups of people. There are the groups of individuals that are robust and maybe they were born that way or whatever it is. And they can
have
ride
less perturbations hormonally. Yeah.
Right. And they're fine.
Yeah.
And then there's another group that might feel like they need to pull back when actually what they really need is to push forward because the mind doesn't allow them to go there, whether it is whatever holds them back, but it doesn't allow them to make the decision that's right for their physiology. It might be right for their mind.
Yeah. And that's okay too, it is. It's kind of a complicated situation. And sometimes I feel like, data has like complicated even more maybe for some folks. But I think if you zoom out and think about it, just basic principles, go with how you feel like that's the most important thing. But I think a lot of elite athletes in particular get pretty disconnected actually from their body. Like we can push through almost anything. And
it's the athlete's trap. That's what killed Kyle Busch. I mean, Shane was in the hospital with pneumonia because he also did the same thing.
I know.
It is so dangerous. And I think our heart goes out to the families and the fans.
I know.
And people that are very fit are able to ignore and push through.
Yep. Yeah. And that's part of what I talk about in the book is just this really, like we have to come back to our body and have to come back to our body signals. And I'm saying this as a person who is very much
a science,
thinks about data. Yeah. I mean, I appreciate data I appreciate the role data has in my life. I would never be from a health perspective where I am today without data. It has transformed the awareness that I have about my body and about how my behaviors impact my resting physiology, just at a very basic level. Would never have been able to unpack that myself. Right?
What is the worst
It just accelerates my wisdom. I mean, sleep-wake consistency is
I hate hearing that.
I know, everyone does. And when you look at our platform, the average sleep-wake consistency of everyone on the platform is 67%. It's so bad, and our frontline healthcare workers, they're like 55%.
This is why I hate it, because there are people that don't get to choose.
Totally. And that's why a lot of the research that I am doing with frontline healthcare clinicians is to figure out how do we mitigate the inconsistent sleep wake time, the deleterious effects of inconsistent sleep wake time. What are other levers that can maybe protect us and offset, and certainly exercise is one. I mean, we know when we age match physicians, operators, how they train really does matter, but they're, for frontline, they're about 17 years older than their age match. Military operators on average are 12. So we look at resting physiology, those two cohorts, their pace of, they're where they sit from just pure resting physiology is decade and a half, relative to age match.
Because what I am hearing you say, what I am trying to put together in my mind is that the autonomic nervous system stability is its own beast.
It really is.
And we are completely ignoring that.
Totally.
I mean, so think about the research that is done in, I think about when I was at WashU in the metabolic lab, we never took into consideration. I mean, we did morning clamps, euglycemic clamps in the morning, but we weren't thinking, okay, so they haven't been in outside and like all of this stuff, which probably affects the data over time. I can't help but think about it.
I mean, to think that is not a core driver of everything else is just, there's just too much data at this point.
So we have sleep-wake
consistency is just massive. I mean, I would argue that time-restricted eating, I know, like, people also, like, I don't want anyone coming hard at me on time-restricted eating, but hopefully there's enough evidence.
There's enough evidence for that. Okay. Also, even from a medical standpoint, it allows for bowel rest.
Yeah.
Time-restricted feeding is just, it allows for a restriction, which is
Right.
extremely valuable.
And I also think there's a psychological component too. A lot of folks are making so many decisions across the day. You have such decision fatigue when it's 9 o'clock at night, and are you going to have the yogurt or are you going to have the pint of ice cream? Right? It's just like, so I do think there's a psychological component that also gets ignored. Mm-hmm. And again, I think it's different if you're a elite athlete versus like a lay person who works out twice a week. Like it's just a different calculus. And I think time restricted eating for those folks becomes really, really important because it just creates a boundary. It just, if you're just like, all right, I'm 12 on, 12 off, like you're going to get 60% of the way to your metabolic goals, I think.
We have found it very effective in clinic for exactly that reason. Yeah. It creates structure and less chaos.
And we know you get a huge boost in parasympathetic activity during sleep when you're not having to digest, right? They're kind of opposing, like you can't digest when you are sleeping and digesting a big meal. Basically your REM slow wave sleep are impaired, right? Until you finish digesting, and then you kind of pop back into those more deeper restorative stages of sleep. So we know that they're in competition, and that's another just reason to just keep your feeding window.
What about exercise timing? Does that matter?
Yeah. So our team at Whoop published a paper in Nature Comms recently that looked specifically at exercise timing, and high intensity close to bed does impair markers of sleep, at a clinically meaningful levels. So getting into deeper, so quality as well as duration, and low level activity does not seem to have any impact at all. So if you're a zone 1, zone 2 kind of workout, or maybe a lighter lift or whatever, that doesn't seem to have much of an impact. It's really just the high intensity stuff within 4 hours of bed will impact your sleep from what we see in the data.
Postpartum pregnancy.
Be gentle. It takes time to rebound to your baseline physiology. There's no question about it. But we did a study that we published with West Virginia University that was really interesting. It was one of the very first studies on exercise and pregnancy. It took us really a long time to get through IRB, but all 19 women who participated in different levels of activity, they all kind of had different starting points, but all 19 had healthy pregnancies. All of them worked out, at moderate to vigorous levels throughout their pregnancy. So that was really cool to see. And I think what was cool with those 19 is that now that I haven't published these data yet, but when we look at those women in that cohort up against women, and albeit that was a very small sample size, but we look at it against women who are on our platform, not working out, having pregnancies, their rebound is not as good as the women who are working out. But I thought that was really interesting. And I think that is consistent with, I think, what we're learning about exercise and pregnancy, that is very protective, obviously under supervision, but it will help postpartum recovery a ton.
How long did it take you to write this book?
I mean, it's a lifetime of work, but 3 years.
There are a ton of takeaways. Was there something that surprised you?
I don't know why I was so naive, but writing a book is really, really hard.
But
but in terms of like the
content,
I would say it was like I found myself like quite emotional at different points writing the book.
I love that. Was it because it was cathartic?
I think so. Yeah. That totally surprised me. I had no idea that I needed to write this book, that I needed to put language, to a lot of the experiences, that I've had across my life, and I think the thing that really surprised me is how I've lived my life, the things that I've chosen, and which sounds obvious, but when I think about my evolution as a scientist, so much of my early days was spent looking at the rhythms of life, and being in nature. It's so wild.
What you're talking about is this full circle moment. That you might think might be obvious, but it's almost as if you were always meant to do exactly what you were doing, right? I mean, it's not dissimilar, and it's like this full circle.
There's definitely forces that are well beyond our understanding control operating. And I think that's part of, I think the bigger project is I think when we have a healthy autonomic nervous system, robust autonomic nervous system, we are in a position to receive from life and from other people in ways that we can't otherwise. It opens up your heart, I think, in a really important and special way. And I think that's the real, if you're to kind of zoom all the way out, I mean, that's I think one of the bigger motivators of getting your autonomic nervous system, firing and online.
And do you think the behavior precedes the thought?
It does. Just do the thing, do the behavior, and you'll start to feel, you'll attract a new energy into your life. Like I really believe that. When you're healthy from the inside in that way,
really
when
whole.
You're whole,
yeah,
you bring the right things into your life, and I just have a lot of faith in that. But I think it starts with doing. You have to take action, and I know that in all of your books, like this is really what you, in everything that you put out online to your community, you're always, I think, challenging folks to do. Just do the thing. Right?
You're not going to be ready.
No
amount of thinking about it or
and that's why the book starts with the physiology, because I think that you can't talk yourself into a better future. Like you just have to start to, if you understand the influences, the physiological influences that impact your nervous system, then like that's like the place to start. It's just to start doing those things, the exercise and the right kind of training, and some of these hormetic practices that can make you feel alive and create that parasympathetic and sympathetic kind of push and pull, that so many of us need. Right?
I mean, I just loved that conceptually. I think it's really missing.
It is.
In a lot of the conversations.
Yes.
Right now, everything is very fragmented, and people will talk about contrast therapy, and then over here they'll talk about training, but this creates a unified front, essentially aligned.
Thank you.
Dr. Kristen Holmes, you are just a dear friend and a sister, and I am so excited to share this book
Thank
with
you.
the world.
I'm so grateful for the conversation today.